Hello once again. Welcome to another Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So that is what I talk about. If you like true crime and you also want to feel better about your makeup skills, you should totally like, subscribe, and let's hang out together every Tuesday where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. So how are y'all doing out there? How's your week so far? Hope it's really, really good. And I hope you are ready for today's case, alright? Today's case is another requested case. And oh my god, there's so much to get into with this case. And even though there's a lot of information out there about this case, like I read so many newspaper articles, there's still so many questions left. Yeah, there's a lot to get into today. We will be talking about Howard Hawk Willis. Have you heard of him? Like I said, this was a requested case, and it was requested by Bright Mama 85. Thank you so much for sending me down this rabbit hole. And I'm going to read your comment at the end because, like, oh my god, you have like some like personal connection to this case, and I just, oh my gosh, it's pretty wild. So thank you so much, Bright Mama 85, for sending this case my way. And before we get into it, just want to let you guys know I may or may not have to possibly take a hiatus. As you may or may not know, I am a freelance casting assistant and I've gotten some work thrown my way. So I'm going to be very, very busy in the next few weeks. I will, of course, let you guys know when and if I have to take any type of break or hiatus. That's always what sucks when you follow a YouTuber, right? Is, you understand life happens, but it sucks when you go to, go on the normal, upload day and it's not there and you're like, oh my god, what happened? So yeah, I always try to let you guys know what's going on. But yeah, hopefully, I don't know, we'll see. I've got a few balls in the air right now that I'm juggling. We'll see if I can handle it. It's gonna be interesting for sure. All right, well, let's get on with this case of Howard Hawk Willis, all right? So, disclaimer, like last week with Joel Guy Jr., we are going to be talking about dismemberment. Now, not nearly as in much detail as last week, but still, just wanted to let you guys know. Some people just stay away from like dismemberment cases altogether. So yeah, just wanted to let you know. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into this case. So, like with most cases, I'm going to be starting with the victims, which, that makes this case especially tragic, is the victims were only 16 and 17. Children, man. So I will be getting into them first. Don't have a whole lot of detail, but again, considering they were 16 and 17, of course there's not going to be a whole lot of information because they didn't get a chance to really live their lives. Alrighty, well, we have a lot to get into, so let's just begin. So let's begin with one of our victims, Samantha Lemming. I've been getting air pockets in this primer, and now I'm like scared to put it on my eye because I really don't want another air pocket in my eye. So let's start with Samantha Lemming. So Samantha Lynn Lemming was born April 1st, 1986 in Walker County, Georgia. And her parents were John and Patty Lemming. Now she had two older half-brothers, one named Daniel Foster, who was about 17 at the events of today's case, and Richard Foster, who was about 19. Richard was also married, and he was married to Julie Lanham Foster. Now, Samantha was described as, quote, spunky, sweet, really dramatic sometimes. Her mother described her as a, quote, typical teenager, and said she had dreams to either be a lawyer or a vet. Now, while Samantha was in high school, which she would drop out of in the 10th grade, she met her future husband, Adam Crismer, who would also end up dropping out of high school. Adam Ray Crismer was born August 25th, 1985, also in Walker County, Georgia. He was born to Richard M. and Teresa Annette Crismer. He also had two brothers and a sister. Now, at some point, I don't know when, but at some point in Adam's childhood, his father unfortunately passed away, and it is said the Crismer family, who were already close before, grew even more close after the passing of Adam's father. Teresa described her son as, quote, outgoing, and said that he really liked Elvis Presley. Quote, when he was little, he swore up and down he talked to Elvis on the phone, and he would do impersonations. He liked doing impersonations of of Elvis and the character Beetlejuice. He liked Jim Carrey. He'd done great impressions of Jim Carrey. He loved to dance, he could sing, and he tried picking a guitar. Now, Adam and Samantha, like I said, met in high school and began dating, and they would be together for approximately a year before the events of today's case take place. Teresa described their affections as that, quote, innocent teen love, you know? And I mentioned this earlier, Adam and Samantha were married. Yeah, when Adam was 17 and Samantha was 16, the two got married. Now, I don't know if this was the reason they got married, but I know at some point the couple thought that Samantha might be pregnant, which I guess Adam was like totally overjoyed about. He was really looking forward to being a father, but that would end up being false. Samantha would not be pregnant and the two would not have any children together. Now, Teresa said both her and Samantha's families considered the kids' marriage like, quote, illegal. And it was because, like, they didn't have anyone of age who could sign off on the marriage certificate. The vibe that I got, you know, and from what I could gather was, you know, the parents didn't mind that they were dating, you know, they loved it, you know, they actually had a pretty good relationship, but it was like a 16 and 17-year-old getting married, like, you're far too young. So the parents weren't, you know, exactly thrilled, and like I just mentioned, they actually considered it, you know, illegal, like, not valid. Now, Julie, remember that was Samantha's sister-in-law? She was married to one of Samantha's brothers, Richard. She said when Samantha was in the 9th grade and she herself, Julie, was pregnant, she actually provided a urine sample for Samantha, and it was so that her and Adam could get a marriage license. And evidently Samantha told her sister-in-law that she wanted to marry Adam. So like I said, they had gone off and gotten married, and even though the parents thought, you know, it was like illegal because they didn't have anyone to sign the marriage certificate, it turns out they did have someone to sign the marriage certificate. It was an older friend of the teen couple, which is just really weird. It was 51-year-old Howard Hawk Willis. Now, I really don't know a whole lot about Howard, unfortunately. Of course, as per usual, I will share with you what I found. So, Howard Hawk Willis was born on March 17th in 1951 in Georgia. I know he worked as a truck driver. He was married twice, and he had a daughter, Kelly Willis Chansey, and he had this daughter with his first wife, Nancy Deborah Lark Willis, who would actually end up disappearing in 1987, and we will get a little bit more into that later. He went on to marry another woman named Wilda Willis, and they would be together for 11 years before they divorced in July of 2002. So in the year 2000, in the state of New York, Howard was arrested and charged with conspiracy possession of over 2,600 pounds of cocaine with intent to distribute. He had been apprehended using his tractor-trailer truck to transport the cocaine from Texas to a warehouse in Brooklyn, New York, where he was busted. He faced a possible sentence of 10 years to life in prison. And remember, because this is like drugs, it's federal prison. Plus, you had the transport from Texas to New York. In May of 2001, Howard pled guilty to the charge of conspiracy to distribute cocaine. And in order to, get a lighter sentence and possibly not get a life sentence, Howard decided to talk. He provided information on the alleged supplier of the cocaine, a man named Kenneth Hart Adams, and Howard agreed to testify at his trial. But when Kenneth was apprehended on the first day of his trial, he ended up pleading guilty, so Howard never had to be called to testify. And on April 2nd, 2002, as Howard was awaiting his sentencing, Magistrate Marilyn Go released Howard from prison on a $200,000 personal recognizance bond. Articles state that the money for this bond was secured by property that some of his family owned. He was listed as being a, quote, cooperating witness, and reports indicate that he was listed as under, quote, federal supervision. He was allowed to return home to his home state of Georgia, where he would have to regularly check in with the U.S. Pretrial Services Agency. Now, apparently this arrangement is pretty common in these types of cases, especially if the defendant was cooperative. There's some property or some other asset to secure a bond, has no prior criminal history, and has strong, secure community ties of some kind, like family. And yeah, because Howard had all of these qualifications, he was released. So that's really all I know about Howard. That's all of the information I could find. So let's go back to Samantha and Adam getting married, all right? So according to Julie, again, Samantha's sister-in-law, in August of 2002, Howard accompanied Adam and Samantha to the courthouse to get their marriage license. And she said that he even paid the $26 fee for them. Now, apparently on this very same day, Howard's own daughter, Kelly, was getting married. Now, John, Samantha's father, was not happy about his daughter being married. Remember, we said that the families of Adam and Samantha were not really supportive of their 16 and 17-year-old kids getting married, right? And Samantha's father was especially pissed off. He said, quote, "I threatened to kill him," referring to Howard, "because he went and got my daughter married." Patty, Samantha's mother, said that she objected to the marriage because of their kids' age. Quote, "I told the kids, no, finish school. Ain't no need in y'all rushing into anything. Y'all still got y'all's whole lives ahead of y'all." But although she objected to the marriage, she did like Adam very much. Like I said, the families liked who their respective kids were dating. You know, Adam's family liked Samantha, and Samantha's family liked Adam. They just, we're not too keen on their 16 and 17-year-olds getting married, which I think a lot of parents would feel the same, right? Now, Teresa, Adam's mother, didn't even know how the kids had met Howard. Quote, "I had met him through my son. As far as knowing him, I didn't know him really that well. He wasn't around that much until right toward the end. And it seems like wherever the kids went, he followed," which is creepy. He's in his 50s hanging out with a couple of 16 and 17-year-olds. Like, come on. Patty said that she thought the teens hung out with Howard because of attention. Quote, "I came to the conclusion that the kids were wanting attention, and they was going to take it from whoever they got it from." Now, several articles said Adam and Samantha had actually been introduced to Howard through Samantha's older brothers, Daniel and Richard. The brothers had evidently partied with Howard and thought he was a cool guy. Daniel said Howard had even helped him get out of trouble with a probation officer once. Quote, "There's not too many people, 50-something years old, who would go out and buy alcohol and come back and let them throw a party. He had a whole bottle full of different kind of pills." Yeah, apparently Howard was known to be quite generous in his partying and apparently was known to party with teenagers, even friends of his daughter Kelly. In fact, one source said that was how Adam and Samantha had been introduced to Howard, was Samantha was friends with Kelly, Howard's daughter. So not sure. Samantha had told her mother that Howard had told them that he would help her and Adam get, quote, "a new identity," and then take them someplace out of the US, someplace exotic. But the only place Howard ever reportedly took the kids was Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Now, Julie and Richard, remember Samantha's brother and her sister-in-law, said Howard would always talk about changing his identity and like taking off, perhaps even to Costa Rica. Richard said Howard had asked him, quote, to get picture IDs with his face on them. And I'm not sure when, how, what the circumstances were that led to this. All I know is at some point in time, Samantha and Adam ended up staying with Howard. And quote, they were all the time partying. It was said that Howard was actually using the teens to sign rental agreements and lease agreements. And this was in order to hide himself from the New York authorities. Because remember, during this time that Howard is partying with teenagers and, getting to know Adam and Samantha, he's still waiting to be sentenced in New York on that federal cocaine case. Now, on September 5th and 7th, 2002, Howard used his stepfather's credit card. His stepfather was Samuel Johnson Thomas, and Howard used his stepfather's credit card at a Walmart in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. And on the surveillance footage, you can actually see Adam with Howard. Now, September 5th would actually be the last day that anyone would report any known sighting or communication from Samuel, Howard's stepfather. And it is later in the same month of September that Samantha thought that she was pregnant. She excitedly told her mother, who just said, quote, "Samantha, you are only 16. How are you going to raise this baby? You are only babies yourselves." Patty said that she planned to ask her daughter and son-in-law to come move in with her. Quote, "I wanted her back close to me." But remember, I mentioned this earlier, it turns out Samantha was not pregnant. So about a month later, on October 1st, 2002, Teresa talked to her son, and he informed his mother how he and Samantha were staying with Howard temporarily. Now, I believe when he called her, he had called her from Howard's mother's house in Johnson City, Tennessee. Howard's mother was Emma Elizabeth Hawk. She also went by Betty Willis. And I was a little confused if Adam and Samantha stayed at Emma's house as well, or just with Howard. I was a little confused about that. But I believe when Adam is talking to his mother on October 1st, he called her from Emma's home in Johnson City, Tennessee. On October 4th, Adam and Samantha were last seen together in Rossville, Georgia. They had gone to a Pizza Hut with Patty to celebrate her birthday. Adam would also speak with his mother that day. And it is on October 5th, about a month after Howard has used his stepfather's credit card at Walmart, that Samuel's family reported the 70-year-old missing. And they reported Samuel missing to the Bradley County authorities. So when police went over to Samuel's home, which was in Cleveland, Tennessee, they saw blood on the stairwell, in the garage, and in a sink, and it led them to believe there was some sort of foul play involved in Samuel's disappearance. And in an effort to, of course, locate Samuel and try to, trace his last whereabouts, police, of course, tracked his credit cards, right? And his bank accounts and stuff. And that is when they stumbled upon that surveillance footage of Howard using Samuel's credit card at Walmart. And remember, Adam was with him. And on the same day, October 5th, that Samuel's reported missing, Kelly called Samuel, and she was surprised when her father answered. Now, Kelly, way later down the road, like I think many years later down the road, would later try to claim that this little tidbit right here was in fact not correct. It was misreported. She had actually called Samuel's phone on September 5th. And her father did answer the phone. And he asked if he could call her back in 5 minutes, which he did. And she said that she talked to Samuel for quite a while at that time when her father called her back. So I don't know. On October 6th, the day after Samuel was reported missing, Teresa spoke on the phone with her son. He told her how he wanted to come home and, quote, he was going to do one last thing for Howard Willis. And this would actually be the last known contact anyone had with Adam or Samantha. They were last seen traveling with Howard from North Georgia to Tennessee. So 5 days later, on Friday, October 11th, 2002, Howard was arrested at his aunt and uncle's house. His aunt and uncle were Howard and Marie Holmes. He was arrested on the federal detainer warrant. When the Eastern District of New York found out that Howard had used his stepfather's credit cards, they revoked his bond and arrested him on violation of parole. Like parole/probation. He was to be sent back to New York to stand before a magistrate there. And I'm guessing they probably thought it was just probably like fraud, maybe coupled with the fact that Samuel was reported missing. Now, when Howard was being arrested, investigators noticed a, quote, dark color stain in the rear cargo area of a blue 1991 Jeep Cherokee that was in the driveway. Howard had actually driven it. And because they noticed this, the vehicle was impounded. Because remember, at this point, they suspected foul play in the disappearance of Samuel because of the appearance of that blood. Now you have Howard, who has been seen using his stepfather's credit card and using it after the last reported sighting of his stepfather, So with all that, added up, they, of course, impounded that car. So that same evening at 9:49 p.m., a fisherman named Luther Whitson was fishing at Boone Lake in Tennessee. He was fishing near a boat ramp at Winged Deer Park, and it is here fishing that he would find Adam's head floating in about 10 feet of water near the boat ramp. Yeah, can you imagine stumbling across that? Dudes, like, man, I've said this before, I never, ever want to stumble across a body. That would be the worst thing ever. Can you imagine how traumatized you would be? The back of the skull was actually missing from the head, and the hole was actually covered with a flap of skin. Officer Don Shepard with the Johnson City Police Department responded to the call and quickly confirmed that, what Luther had found was indeed an actual human head. It wasn't a fake. It was real. Adam's head also had wounds indicating a gunshot wound to the chin. Now, the next morning, the investigation was fed even more momentum when Adam's left hand was found. It was found by fisherman Edward Baker, and he was fishing at the point at Devil's Backbone near Knob Creek Boat Dock Road around 7 a.m. as he was fishing for a fishing tournament. Edward and his partner were, just minding their business, doing their thing and fishing, when they noticed an object bobbing in the water about 20 feet away, and as they, got closer, it appeared to be a hand. Quote, it didn't look real. And because, Halloween was near, that was kind of like their knee-jerk reaction, and like their knee-jerk thought was, oh, it's some costume, some Halloween prop. But as they got closer to it, they noticed a smell. And they also started to notice more detail on the hand, like bone and sinew. Quote, that is not a fake. That is a real hand. They collected the hand, went back to shore, and called the police. And when the police got on scene, an investigator with the Washington County Sheriff's Department would end up finding Adam's right hand at about 11:45, a quarter-mile downstream, just south of the DeVault Bridge. Now, authorities noticed that the hands were not nearly as decomposed as the head. And they also saw that on the hands, all the fingernails had been removed. Washington County Director Sheriff Fred Phillips thought at first that the hands they found were of a female. He didn't even think that they'd matched the head that they had found because the hands were like so small. But later testing would prove that they were indeed Adam's. Now, as investigators worked to positively identify the head and hands that they found, they noticed that both of them had, some similarities. They had both been severed, quote, in a very brutal fashion, with a tool with a jagged edge. And in order to try to identify the head and hands, they of course started with any missing persons reports that would match the description, right? On Sunday, October 13th, Teresa filed a missing persons report for Adam. She filed the report with the Walker County, Georgia Sheriff's Department and said that she hadn't spoken to her son in a few days. And she just had a very uneasy feeling. It just wasn't like Adam to be out of contact that long. She told authorities the last time she had spoken to her son was October 6th. And it was, of course, as the Washington County authorities were working to identify the head and hand, and the Walker County authorities working the missing persons report filed by Teresa, that the head and hands would be positively identified as belonging to Adam. Teresa was also able to identify the head as belonging to her son. This was based on a BB shot that was found embedded in Adam's right cheek. I guess he had like a BB shot in there from a long time ago, and the buckshot or something was still wedged in there. There was a surgical scar on the right side of his skull that she was able to identify, and there was some large cyst forming on the left side that she was able to identify as well. Now, I was confused on when this happened, but I know a little girl who was camping with her family would end up finding a piece of Adam's skull. They were camping near the area where the head and hands had been found, and she would end up finding a piece of Adam's skull. But again, I wasn't too sure when that happened. Now, Sheriff Phillips would end up taking charge of the case, and this case would end up spanning multiple counties and agencies. Authorities also worked to establish some sort of connection between Adam's murder and Samuel's disappearance. Remember, they had that surveillance footage of Howard at Walmart, and Adam was with him. And authorities were actually hoping to speak with Adam because they wanted to find out, since he was with Howard, what'd you do that day? They thought maybe he might have some information regarding Samuel's whereabouts. But now that was out the window because, oh look, now Adam is gone. So of course, with, Samuel missing with suspected foul play involved and Adam now confirmed dead, authorities turned their eyes to the only logical suspect, right? The only guy that these two have in common. It's Howard, and wouldn't you know, he's in custody, so they could talk to him. When she was interviewed the next day on Monday, October 14th, by authorities, Teresa said she had seen Adam and Samantha in a blue Jeep Cherokee, and they were driving it. And this was about the last week of September. So authorities had, wanted to speak to her about, what do you know about Howard and this connection and whatnot, right? And that was what Teresa had revealed, was that, last I saw them, they were in this, blue Jeep Cherokee. Oh, and wouldn't you know, there's a blue Cherokee in the driveway when they arrested Howard, and it had a dark stain. So, of course, right, with this pretty big coinkydink, the next day on Tuesday, October 15th, search warrants were issued at 1 a.m. and executed at 9 a.m. for the homes of Howard's aunt and uncle, Howard and Marie Holmes, and for Howard's mother, Emma Elizabeth Hawk. Now, in the warrants, authorities stated that they wanted to search these residences for any sign or proof that Samantha and Adam were there. Credit cards, personal belongings, personal property belonging to Samuel. They also wanted to see if there was any evidence of Samuel being there. Quote, as well as evidence of the suspected homicides of Thomas, Samuel, Lemming, Samantha, and Crismer, Adam. Authorities said in the warrants that they expected to find like bullets and or bullet fragments, blood and or bodily fluids, ammunition, casings, and structural damage from gunfire. They would end up searching Emma's home twice, and inside her home they did find Adam's ID, hair and carpet samples, 2 envelopes and other miscellaneous like papers and paperwork belonging to Samantha, ammunition for a .32 caliber and a .38 caliber gun, a hacksaw, and a piece of thin yellow rope. Now, it was initially reported that authorities had found pornographic images of Adam and Samantha in Emma's home. However, that was incorrect. There were pictures that Howard had turned in to a local film agency, I think to get developed. And in these images, I guess Samantha, Adam, and Howard are all seen with other people. And I guess at least one of these photographs can be described as pornographic because it showed Samantha nude and male genitalia that was exposed. Now, because of these discoveries, plus the fact that Howard was a known drug trafficker, Sheriff Phillips mistakenly, and without any kind of proof whatsoever, told the media that the case looked like it was like a sex for cocaine deal gone wrong or something. And I guess he really hyped up the like drug and sex aspect of the case. Now, apparently this really pissed off Samantha's mother, who vehemently denied that Samantha or Adam did drugs. Sure that, they partied and drank, maybe even smoked a little weed, but they had never consumed like hardcore drugs is what she was adamantly saying. She said Phillips' assertion, quote, "The investigation will probably reveal he," referring to Howard, "had a sexual relationship with the girl," was just untrue and very hurtful to her. Quote, "The sex and drugs part was what really bothered her. Like, that's what really upset her, was the fact that he was sort of like highlighting this aspect of the case as if it was like, like super important. Quote, "My daughter didn't do drugs. Adam was no drug taker." So the same day that the warrants are being executed, as Howard is sitting in jail, he called up his second ex-wife, Wilda Willis. He called her up from behind bars at the Washington County Detention Center and asked her to visit him so he could talk to her. He wanted her to bring a, quote, "tape recorder, a pad of paper, and a pen." Wilda said that Howard, quote, "tapes everything." So this request wasn't really all that unusual. She said Howard talked to her because, quote, "I'm the one he trusts." And on Wednesday, October 16th, Wilda visited her ex-husband in jail and, per his request, recorded the conversation. Now, if you can believe it, in this conversation, Howard confides in Wilda that he had actually killed Adam and Samantha and admitted to dismembering Adam's body. Like, what? Now, he told Wilda that he had killed and dismembered Adam because Adam had allegedly killed and dismembered Samuel. Now, Samuel was not only Howard's stepfather, he was Wilda's uncle. Now, when Wilda, asked Howard, so you shot them? He responded, quote, "Adam and Samantha? Yeah, I blew their brains out when they told me what they did to Sam. Pulled the trigger right then and there. I don't know, Wilda, just got too upset." This case gets so bonkers. So Howard said that Adam had told him that he and Daniel, remember, Samantha's older brother, had robbed Samuel at his home. Quote, "I went bananas because Adam laughed because he said it was so damned easy." Howard said that he asked Adam for more details, and Adam had supposedly told Howard that they had shot Samuel as he was sleeping in his chair. So Howard told Wilda he decided he was going to treat Adam in the same manner, and he shot him right there. He told Wilda he had dismembered Adam because that's what they had done to Samuel. He told her he had disposed of Adam's head and hands into the lake, and that the rest of his body and Samantha's were in a storage unit that his mother rented. He said Samantha had been standing right beside Adam when he shot him, and so he shot her too. And as we'll get into, Howard will change his story multiple times. And I know at one point in time, he confessed to Wilda that he actually had killed Samuel. Howard also told Willa that his mother and aunt knew he had killed Adam and Samantha and had actually helped him dispose of their bodies. After this conversation, Wilda took the tape to authorities. And by examining records, investigators were able to identify that storage unit that Howard was talking about. Emma rented a unit at the 24-hour self-storage facility located in Johnson City, Tennessee. And she had actually rented the unit on October 10th. And at the request of law enforcement, Wilda then called up Emma and Marie, Howard's mother and aunt, because she knew them. She was friends with them. And authorities wanted to, see what they knew because, Howard was claiming claiming that they were in on it. And, Wilda agreed. So she called them up and told them about Howard's confession, the taped confession that she had. And in this conversation, Emma does admit that she rents the storage unit. And throughout the conversation, she begs Wilda at least 4 or 5 times to destroy the tape. Marie makes the same plea in the conversation about 2 or 3 times, and also advises Wilda not to talk to the police. Now, during this, rapid-fire conversation going on, Emma says that Howard had admitted to killing, quote, all those people. He point-blank told me he did it. He said he blew their brains out. And then someone says, either Emma or Marie, it was hard to, distinguish the voices at certain times, but some voice says, quote, he didn't do it. And then another voice says, quote, erase that tape right now. Now, during the conversation, Wilda also informs the women that, hey, Howard is saying you guys were in on it, that you guys helped him and stuff. One of the sisters then says, quote, he's about to crack up, and tells Wilda to, quote, erase that tape immediately. Emma then says, quote, erase that tape immediately, because he told me the other night that he would rather die than stay in prison. Now remember, not only is this conversation being, monitored by authorities were also watching Marie's home where Emma was staying for the moment, and it was during this staged conversation that they would, raid the home. And even though Emma tried to hide in a back room under a bed, she was taken into custody and charged with tampering with evidence and some more serious charges that involved abuse of a corpse. And Marie was also arrested for tampering with evidence. On the same day, authorities talked to Howard's uncle, probably as they were raiding the home and arresting his wife and sister-in-law. And Howard's uncle, Howard Holmes, said that his nephew had borrowed his car and trailer and had used it to haul some carpet that he had cut out of his mother's dining room at her home. Apparently, Howard told his uncle that there were maggots in the carpet. Detectives would also end up talking to a lawyer named Jim Miller, who told them he had been at Emma's home on September 27th. And at that time, he saw both Adam and Samantha there, and there was no carpet missing, there was no maggots, everything was fine. On Thursday, October 17th, Sheriff Phillips traveled to Johnson City, Tennessee, to the storage facility, accompanied by officers from the Broward County Sheriff's Department, and they were gonna check out this storage shed that they've heard so much about. Now, at this point, they did not know the exact unit number that was Emma's. However, get this, as they were walking around the facility, they came towards Building X. And when they got here, they began to smell the nauseatingly familiar stench of death. Of decomposition. They followed the stench to unit X47, where they also noticed maggots on a concrete slab that was next to the door to the unit. Turns out this was the one Emma rented. And at 3:30 p.m., they executed a search warrant for the unit. Quote, we have discovered bad odors that could be body odors. Odors consistent with decomposition. They sealed off the business, barring public access. And once they unlocked the unit, they found 2 4.5-foot long by 2-foot deep sealed containers, and they were covered by a tarp, and that tarp was wrapped in a thin yellow rope. Now, when they made this discovery, they did not remove the tarp or the rope. They didn't want to risk contaminating any type of evidence or anything, so they actually waited for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to send a mobile crime lab, who would actually end up spending 6 hours processing the scene. And when the mobile crime lab got there, they opened the containers, and in one of them was the remains of Adam. His torso was wrapped in a jacket, and in another one of the containers, they found Samantha, who was intact. Her hands were tied behind her back. She had bindings on her legs, and she had a gag in her mouth that was a floral pillowcase. Very similar to the one found in Emma's home. Samantha had a gunshot wound to the back of her head, and they could also see wounds that had been inflicted by a, quote, blunt instrument. Both Adam and Samantha were, quote, in a very bad state of decomposition. They also found carpet fibers in these containers that were a match to carpet fibers that had been taken from Emma's home. Authorities also found a hatchet, a large pair of scissors, a hammer, and 2 containers that were filled with a mixture of diesel fuel and gasoline, which they believed was going to be used to burn any remaining body parts. Phillips said of the storage discoveries, quote, I think what we're talking about here today is a very, very brutal murder. I think this is one of the most brutal murders that I have been involved with. There was another article that said that there was another conversation between Marie and Emma that was recorded by a, quote, unknown person. So I don't know if it was Wilda or not, because this article had already reported the conversation that she had recorded earlier. So I don't know, but someone evidently recorded a conversation between Emma and her sister. And I guess the conversation was happening as the news was breaking that authorities were swarming the storage facility. And upon hearing that police had sealed off the storage facility because they had smelled like decomposition, Marie said, quote, "They found the bodies." But as it turns out, Adam and Samantha wouldn't be the only ones discovered that day. So as authorities were swarming the storage unit, pieces of Samuel's body were found. One set of his remains was cut into 4 parts, and it was found in 4 separate locations on a golf course development in Tequita Falls, which is located in Walker County, Georgia, which is where Adam and Samantha were from. More of his remains would be found by authorities with Walker County, Georgia, and authorities with Bradley County, Tennessee, and his remains would be found on the Georgia side of Lookout Mountain alongside Highway 157. Apparently, this mountain range is very long and it stretches across 3 states. And I'm not sure how authorities were tipped off to this location. The article only said, quote, "Walker County Sheriff Steve Wilson had gathered new information. That information being that Samuel's remains could be found on this mountain." The search first started with Adam's stepfather, Larry Lynch's property. He was not a suspect. His property was on Lookout Mountain, and though authorities didn't find any of Samuel's remains on his property, they continued to search throughout this area. They found Samuel's torso and lower extremities. His head and arms were missing, and preliminary autopsy results would show that he had been shot in the chest. But it was at first unclear if that was what killed him. X-rays showed broken ribs that were consistent with a gunshot wound, but until they found his head, I guess they couldn't be too sure. Now, at this time, all right, as the story is breaking, making the press rounds, media started reporting on the disappearance of Howard's first wife, Nancy Deborah Lark Willis. So let's go a little bit more into that. I mentioned it very briefly earlier. Let's get a little bit more into that. So Nancy Deborah Lark Willis, she actually went by Deborah, was born on January 28th in 1961, and she was one of 7 children. Her family hailed from Scott County, Virginia, specifically Yuma. Now, the oldest sibling, Gertrude Lark, said she had known Howard since 1983 when he first came around to court her youngest sister. Gertrude said of Howard, quote, "I didn't trust him back then. He was scary. It was just the way he was. He was just plumb creepy." She said there was just something about him that she never liked from the moment she met him. Now, Deborah had an existing child from a previous marriage when she got with Howard, and Deborah and Howard would end up married in August of 1985. They would end up having a child of their own, Kelly. We've mentioned her a couple times. Deborah and Howard would only be married about 16 months before she would disappear. And in those 16 months, there was 2 strange, scary, near-death accidents that Deborah would experience. And this was as they were living in Washington County, Georgia. And I guess these incidents also happened close together. There was some kind of suspicious car accident, and then there was some sort of house fire while they were living in Telford. But Deborah survived both of these accidents, and Gertrude said even back then, she believed Howard was trying to kill her sister. She believed that those were not accidents. Howard then moved Deborah and Kelly to the Chattanooga area. And the last time Gertrude would see her little sister would be Christmas time of 1986, when Deborah visited Scott County, Virginia. Apparently, this was an especially sad Christmas for the family because it was the first Christmas without their father. He had just passed away that previous August. So it was the first holiday without their dad. And man, that just sucks. And then her siblings just get one Christmas with Deborah before she would disappear. It's just so sad. And when Deborah left Virginia to go back home to Georgia, Gertrude never heard from her sister again. Gertrude said that she would try to call and get a hold of Deborah, but Howard would always say that she was unavailable. And on March 12th, 1987, Howard called up Gertrude and told her that he had dropped Deborah off at a bus station. And this was the day before, saying Deborah wanted to get away and that she had $900 with her. Gertrude said, quote, "I knew that was a lie. She was a loving mother with 2 children who depended on her. She would not have done that. She would not have left her kids with him. Deborah was last seen in Ocoee County, Georgia, which is just south of Chattanooga. But Gertrude's dealings with Howard would not end at her sister's disappearance. Gertrude and Deborah's mother actually had custody of Kelly after Deborah went missing. Not sure what happened to her older child. Maybe that older child went with the father. And I'm not even sure why she was given custody of Kelly, but that is what they say is after Deborah goes missing, her mother then takes custody of Kelly, and Howard would actually kidnap Kelly from her grandmother and would end up being apprehended in Oklahoma. Now, according to Gertrude, Samuel was with Howard when he was busted in Oklahoma, like trying to kidnap his daughter. That is what Gertrude claims. Now, following the kidnapping, Kelly actually went to go live with Gertrude for a while because Gertrude and Deborah's mother was actually starting to suffer from Alzheimer's. Gertrude said, quote, "When she lived with me, I tried to tell her what her mother was like. Kelly had told her aunt that Howard had told her that her mother had abandoned her." Which isn't that completely messed up? Now, unfortunately for Gertrude, a judge in Bradley County, Tennessee, gave custody of Kelly back to Howard. Quote, "The judge said the truth didn't matter in the case." So that is everything we know about Deborah's disappearance. I don't know what's going on with my little planet there. I think the battery's dying, so it's probably gonna change some colors there. Anyway, so since we had this case of Adam, Samantha, and Samuel going on, this had renewed interest in Deborah's disappearance. Apparently back then, authorities had planned to check the basement of a home Howard had built in Bradley County, Tennessee, but they were never able to. And Bradley County Sheriff's Department Captain Chip Bryant said the discovery of Adam, Samantha, and Samuel had reignited interest in Deborah's disappearance. And the revelations of, the bodies of Adam, Samantha, and Samuel, quote, "strengthens our theory that he killed Deborah Willis many years ago and concealed the bodies." Captain Bryant said that he was contacting the FBI in order to use some sort of sonar device that they had, and they wanted to use this to search the basement of that home. Gertrude said while she was happy that, they were investigating her sister's case and there was renewed interest in it, she felt that the Bradley County Sheriff's Department didn't do enough back then. Quote, "You can't trust law enforcement. I believe politics and friendships between the sheriff and Willis came up." She said that she hoped her niece was all right and did worry about how all of these recent revelations were affecting her. Quote, "I would like to reach out to her and let her know I love her. She has my number. I hope she will call me." Now, Captain Bryant said that there were 3 factors that were occurring now in 2002 that enabled them to dive deeper into Deborah's disappearance that they didn't have back in 1987. Quote, "First, Sam Thomas would not let us search his home back then. Well, Sam Thomas is no longer around, and Willis does not have an interest in the house. Second, we have more probable cause that there was foul play now, based on what has been uncovered in Johnson City and Georgia. Third, we have new technology we didn't have before. A judge is going to let us use sonar that doesn't cause any damage, a lot easier than he would let us take a jackhammer to tear up a concrete floor." In the end, they did sweep the basement floor of Samuel's home, which I guess Howard had lived in before Samuel, but in the end, they found no trace or evidence of human remains. So let's go back to Emma and Marie, Howard's mother and aunt who had been arrested. Now, I was so confused because some reports said that they had been arrested when cops were taping that conversation between them and Wilda, but then there were way more articles that said the women were actually arrested on the 17th, the same day that they made the discoveries of Adam and Samantha's bodies. So I'm not sure, but we do know Emma was 71, and she was charged with 2 counts of abuse of a corpse, 1 count each of being an accessory after the fact of first-degree murder, and attempting to tamper with evidence. And Marie was only charged with tampering with evidence. She was 74. Now, Sheriff's investigator Todd Hull said Emma knew that her son was putting, quote, mutilated bodies in the storage shed, and Sheriff Phillips said that there was a, quote, high possibility that she even participated in the dismemberment. Marie would end up posting a $10,000 bond, but Emma would remain behind bars. Marie had also told investigators that her husband had taken some carpet to a landfill as a favor to Howard. She said her nephew had cut up materials in his mother's home due to, quote, blood and maggots that were in the carpet. So there's some small discrepancies discrepancy between Marie and what her husband is saying. Her husband was saying that Howard had done it, and she was saying her husband did it. But either way, we have a bloody, maggot-filled carpet being removed from Howard's mother's home. By Friday, authorities were seeking a first-degree murder indictment for Howard. They believed that Samantha and Adam had been murdered at Emma's home, and this was based on evidence that they had found at her residence. They also said both Emma and Marie, quote, could be facing some very serious charges. Authorities were seeking to indict Howard with a special grand jury, and this was due to the federal government's custody of Howard. Remember, Howard is in custody under his, probation violation or whatever from New York. So he was in federal custody, and he was due to be transferred to New York to, be sentenced there. But I guess a temporary writ had been filed by Tennessee authorities that delayed Howard's transport for at least 10 days. And this allowed investigators to gather their grand jury and present their evidence. So at this juncture, Sheriff Phillips told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, quote, there's a strong possibility Willis impregnated Lemming and then forced Crismer to marry her. But remember, I've said this a couple times now, Samantha was not pregnant, and to be honest with you, we'll get to it at the end of the case. I'm not sure, if there was any kind of, sexual relationship between Howard and Adam and Samantha. I didn't really read anything about that. Now, by this time, Samuel's home had also been searched, where police found, quote, conclusive indications of gunshot activity. And it was somewhere around this time period that Howard opted to talk to investigators. A Washington County Sheriff Sergeant and director of the 1st Judicial District Drug Task Force, Kenneth Phillips, and investigator Hall went and spoke with Howard behind bars. And they interviewed him over the course of 2 days to, see what he had to say. In these interviews, Howard pins the blame of the murders of Samantha and Adam on his mother. According to Phillips, he said Howard told them, quote, that he didn't kill either one of them, that it must have been Betty. Remember, Emma also goes by Betty Willis. Howard said that it was his mother who had forced him to load the containers that contained Adam and Samantha's body into the car, specifically into the back of the Jeep. He claimed that at that time he had no idea their bodies were in there. He told them about his mother's storage unit that she had rented, and told authorities that his mother had made him load those containers into the storage shed. Quote, the next day, he got suspicious because Adam and Samantha weren't around. So he went back to the building, opened the containers up, and found their bodies. So it was his assumption that his mother, Betty Willis, had killed both of them. Howard also wanted to explain away, why they would find his fingerprints and stuff there. Sheriff Phillips said of Howard's little accusations here, quote, in my opinion, he was lying. Apparently, Howard also told investigators that he had had consensual sex with Samantha on 3 different occasions. And look, even if that is true, if they did have physical contact, she was 16. No, you did not consent to have sex with her. You sexually assaulted her. On Tuesday, October 22nd, Howard's home in Chickamauga, Georgia was searched. This home was searched by Walker County Sheriff's Department after Howard had lost the home in bankruptcy. Apparently, the home had been foreclosed on as Howard and Wilda were going through their divorce. Sheriff Steve Wilson said, quote, since this was Mr. Willis's former residence, we felt it needed to be searched. He said that they also had reason to believe that Adam and Samantha had stayed with Howard in this home. Howard had another home in Cleveland, Tennessee that was searched. I was unclear if this was perhaps Sam's house, because remember we said earlier that Howard had lived in that home before Samuel, or if Howard just lived in the same city as his stepfather. The dude seems to not lack properties. And on Wednesday, October 23rd, after 2 hours of deliberations, a Washington County grand jury indicted Howard on 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder and 2 counts of abuse of a corpse. At that point, it was theorized, based on the decomposition of the bodies, that Howard had killed Adam first on October 6th, and had killed Samantha 3 days later on October 9th. And they were theorizing that the couple were killed because they knew something about Samuel's murder. District Attorney General Joe Crumley said at a news conference, due to the dismemberment and the number of murders, they were going to seek the death penalty against Howard. Quote, this is just a very brutal murder. This is probably the most brutal murder that I've ever been involved in. And even though Howard had been indicted, the federal court for the Eastern District of New York was still on track to have Howard transferred there. Crumley did say that he would file like a bunch of like writs and stuff that would take Howard out of federal custody, but for the moment they were kind of playing ball. The reason they wanted Howard to stay in Tennessee was just because of like the tedious process it was going to take to get him transferred back once he was out of the state and in New York. And on Monday, October 28th, Howard was transferred from Tennessee to New York, and he had a hearing scheduled for February 14th, 2003, where he would learn his sentence, all right? He would learn his punishment for that cocaine charge that he had. It was supposed to be in December of 2002, but a judge had granted Howard's attorney, Andrew Carter, a request to delay it. Now, Crumley, though a little annoyed that it had been, delayed, he said in the end he didn't really mind because this was just giving them more time to get, like, their testing back on, like, evidence and DNA and, like, all that stuff. But Crumley did say he would file appropriate paperwork if it looked like Howard was going to be delayed even longer. And, whoo boy, my dudes, we'll get into it, man. Now, if a federal judge sentenced Howard, the paperwork to transfer him back to Tennessee was just going to be like, I don't know, just like more complicated, more convoluted or whatever. But Crumley also said that a judge could rule that Howard stay in trial in Tennessee first before he serves out his New York sentence. Now, as far as building a case against Howard for the murder of his stepfather, Samuel, that was still ongoing. Investigators didn't believe for a minute that Adam had anything to do with it. They didn't believe anything Howard said. Investigators believed the only reason Howard had contacted Wilda to come visit him behind bars and record the conversation was to help build his defense in Samantha and Adam's murders. Captain Bryant said, quote, "This does not change our investigation one bit. We are getting more and more evidence that entangles Willis." And again, he was referring to the fact that they didn't believe Howard's story about Adam having anything to do with Samuel's death. Wilda was asked at the time what, she thought of all these revelations of her ex-husband being accused of murders, like 3 murders, and like everything that was going on. And she just said, quote, "I don't think he killed anyone. I cannot see him doing what they say he did." She described Howard as a nice, gentle man and didn't believe that he murdered Deborah either. She actually believed Deborah had just up and abandoned Howard and their children. Another interesting tidbit, all right, that would come out was apparently when Kenneth was arrested and going to trial, Kenneth, remember, he was the supplier of the cocaine that Howard had been busted with. Remember, Howard was going to testify against him in exchange for hopefully like a pretty sweet deal? Well, apparently, like before his trial, his attorney, Donald Dubélé, tried to argue to the judge that the jury should be able to hear about the disappearance of Deborah. Quote, "If foul play was reasonably suspected in his wife's disappearance, this matter is a legitimate inquiry into the credibility of the witness." But the prosecutors had successfully argued that this accusation was baseless and without merit. They truly believed he had nothing to do with Deborah's disappearance back in the day. Meanwhile, as Howard was sitting in New York, Samantha's father and brothers were pretty angry. They, were angry that he was in New York and not in Tennessee facing charges. John, remember Samantha's father, said, quote, "I just want Howard back down here to stand trial for murder. I don't know why the government is letting him stay in New York." He was also wondering why the government wasn't like actively checking up on Howard as he was released to Georgia. And he was angry that no one had told him anything about his daughter's case. He had read everything in the paper. Crumley claimed that no one from Samantha's family ever contacted them requesting information. So, not sure. So let's go back to Howard's mother. All right, so remember, Howard's mother and aunt they're wrapped up in this too. All right, so let's see what happens with them. So Emma did have a temporary court-appointed attorney, Clifton Corker, and he did seek a mental evaluation of his client. He said he found it difficult to communicate with her, blaming like all the medications and stuff she was on. In like I think it was like her first court appearance or something, she arrived in court in a wheelchair and with an eye patch. I guess she had fallen in her cell and had received like 2 stitches on her head. She had a cut on her head. Judge John Kiner granted Corker's request, delaying Emma and Marie's hearings for a month. However, in the end of November, Emma was found to be mentally competent to stand trial, and Crumley dropped the charges against the sisters to a lesser charge of solicitation to tamper with evidence. Although Emma was still charged with the more serious charges of the abuse of a corpse and accessory, and on Tuesday, January 7th, 2003, Emma and Marie were both indicted. Now, later in the month, like, guys, okay, I've actually been waiting to get to this part. The court drama in this family is unlike anything else I read. So we're gonna start like this whole long court saga with Howard, his mother, and his aunt. All right, so be ready. So later in the month of January 2003, after she's indicted, Marie requested to be tried separately from her sister. She told the court, quote, "I would like to request a separate trial from her. We had gone 5 years without speaking until back in the summer, and then she got sick. And the only way the doctor would let her out of the hospital was to come to my house. That's how I got involved in it, and I'm sorry. I have no relationship with her whatsoever." Drams! Oh my gosh, and the drams between these sisters is just starting. Meanwhile, as Marie is, begging to be tried separately, Emma was just sitting in jail, and she was upset because she had been, sitting in jail this whole time. She was arrested back in October of 2002. We're in January of 2003. She's still been in jail, and she was just very mad. The judge had refused to lower her bond. On October 30th, Wilda did an interview with a local news station, WJHL, and some of this interview was aired in a segment on the news, and some portions were not aired. Now, the station handed over the parts of the interview that did air to prosecutors, but they refused to hand over the unaired portions. Apparently, in these unaired portions of the interview, Wilda apparently gives her reasons and thoughts for why she thought Howard didn't murder the teens. However, the article I read this in said that in the aired portion, Wilda said she did believe Howard killed the teens. So I was a little confused about that. And Wilda would be accused of being a little flip-floppy in this case, so I don't know if that was an example of that or what. Now, prosecutors tried getting the unaired portions from the station, they tried getting a court to force the station to hand them over. But in the end, the station won, and they did not have to hand over that unaired interview, or portions of the interview, rather. On Thursday, January 30th, 2003, Emma, who again has been sitting in jail this whole time, tried to file a furlough request that would enable her to temporarily get out of jail. She told Judge Lynn Brown that she needed to remove her furniture and other things from her home it was being foreclosed on. She said Marie, her sister, had not made house payments in all of the time that she had been out, even though, according to Emma, her sister had her checkbook and stuff. Emma also accused her sister of spending her money and writing checks left and right and just completely messing up her finances. And she said she needed this time out of jail to sort all of this out. She wrote, quote, "Because my sister has messed up so many things for me, and I have no one who can do anything, I need the furlough to handle these things." Yeah, accusing her sister of ripping her off now. But the next day, get this. So the next day, Marie, through her attorney, Scott Pratt, filed a motion to prevent Emma's release. Yeah, filed a motion to block and argue against Emma's furlough request. Now, Pratt said that Emma had sent her sister numerous threatening letters as she was sitting in jail, and said that Marie was worried that if her sister was released from jail, that Emma would come and hurt her. Yeah, Pratt said in his motion, quote, "Miss Hawk has access to firearms and has experience using them. Mrs. Holmes has observed firearms, handguns, in Miss Hawk's home in the past. And Mrs. Holmes' son has been forced to disarm Miss Hawk on occasions when Miss Hawk pointed a weapon at him." Pratt also handed over some of the letters that were the basis of Marie's fears. In one, talking about her son, Emma had written, quote, "I hate him more every day I sit here. I am so sorry I ever had Howard. He has cost me everything I ever worked for." In another letter, she ranted about Wilda and her own granddaughter, Kelly. She wrote, quote, "Kelly and Wilda are going to pay too. I don't give a damn that Kelly is pregnant. She should not have stolen from me and tore at my house. And Wilda will serve her time too." Emma accused her granddaughter of going through her house, going through her things, and stealing a bunch of stuff. Emma accuses everyone of stealing stuff. She wrote, quote, "She told me in the hospital that she stole my clothes, shoes, mother's ring and watch, and some of my jewelry. I was an old woman and I did not need them, and she did. All I can say is she sealed her own future, and that baby can be born in jail. I am sick of her and her filthy mouth. So if you think I won't make them all pay, you are wrong. Kelly for stealing and tearing up my house, Wilda for her lies. The longer I stay here, the more hate I have." Yeah. In another letter, Emma stated that she had actually kicked Samantha and Adam out of her house. And this was in April of 2002. And this was for daring to have sex in her house, in her dining room. Quote, "I told Howard not to ever bring them back. I told Adam never to come on the property again, since he was out of his mind on drugs." She also wrote in these letters that she did not kill the teens, and was actually at Marie's home when they were being killed and dismembered. In response to Marie's motions, Emma filed off another letter to the court on February 5th, 25th, and it stated, quote, "I have never, ever threatened Marie Hawk Holmes. I would not do anything to her. The devil will give her the punishment she deserves for all of the people she has hurt with her lies and gossip." She told Judge Brown that her house was being auctioned off on February 13th, and that she needed to gather like all of her personal belongings and stuff before that happened. She claimed that this was the real reason that her sister was trying to block her furlough. Quote, "Mrs. Holmes' reason for this is she wants my things for herself and her children. She is very jealous and always has been all of my life." Now, Crumley was also opposing Emma's furlough, and he was arguing against it because he truly believed she was a flight risk. Quote, "We think she's an extreme flight risk. At the time of one of the search warrants, she had a passport application in her possession. People are afraid of her." Now, Emma denied this. Quote, "I've never been in trouble in my life. I have no reason to run. I intend to clear myself of this. And I'm definitely not a threat to anyone." In the end, Judge Brown rejected Emma's furlough, saying he didn't have any authority to grant her one because she hadn't been sentenced to anything. He said that she instead needed to seek a bond reduction, but that wouldn't happen until she had an attorney. And remember, Corker was only like temporarily assigned to her or something like that. Judge Brown believed that Emma did have money to hire her own attorney. He didn't believe that she was in the financial situation to have a court-appointed attorney. And Emma disputed this, so he appointed Corker, Clifton Corker, to investigate her finances. The judge also said that Corker could help her, line things up on the outside so she could take care of the things that she needed to on the outside. But she just said, quote, "There's nobody I trust on the outside now, sir. Thank you." And the judge, I guess, shot back, quote, "All the people you trust are on the inside." And she retorted, quote, "There's nobody I trust inside either, but there certainly isn't anybody outside. I would not have thought my sister and brother-in-law would have done me like they did, but it happens." And this would just be the first of many sort of like back and forth, like snippy conversations between Emma and the judge. Yeah, it was really funny reading this. Emma said Howard had forged her signature to get a loan on like her certificate of deposits or something, and said that he had borrowed money on her house so that he could build his own house. She accused Marie of playing Russian roulette with her finances while she'd been locked up in jail, In the end, it was found that Emma did qualify for a court-appointed attorney, so Corker was then assigned to her permanently. Corker had found that she had actually owed money on the home and that it had actually been trashed and vandalized, like while she had been locked up this whole time, and it had been foreclosed on. And on April 14th, Emma pled not guilty. So let's go a little bit back to Marie and what was going on with her case. So in February of 2003, Marie pleaded not guilty and through her attorney was still requesting a separate trial from her sister. Pratt argued that due to the more like serious, insidious charges against Emma that involved dismemberment, it would prejudice the jury against Marie if she was like at the same defense table as her sister. And on April 25th, Judge Brown agreed, and he ordered the sisters be tried separately. Now, as all of this drama was going down between Emma and Marie in the court, on Monday, March 17th, 2003, Samuel's skull was found. It was discovered in a wooded area about 200 feet away from a new boat ramp at Winged Deer Park, the same area where Adam's remains were found. Now, it is said Wilda had actually discovered her uncle's head, had taken pictures of it, and then had notified authorities. She had made a vow to find her uncle after turning over those incriminating tapes that Howard had her record. Apparently, during a jailhouse visit on October 16th, 2002, Howard had given Wilda like 2 locations to check for Samuel's remains. Quote, "Before I got back to Walker County, Georgia, he had already called my daughter 2 or 3 times, telling me that he had thought of another location for me to go look for my uncle's body, and that I needed to call him immediately." But yeah, I don't know if they had been searching since October or what, but yeah, they didn't find Samuel's skull until March. So I guess Wilda, with about 18 to 20 investigators, searched this wooded area, and while they were searching, I guess at one point they arranged for Wilda to talk to Howard like in real time, I don't know, maybe with like a satellite phone or something, and I guess Howard directed them to another location, and that is where they found Samuel's skull. And 2 weeks after it was found, it was positively identified to be that of Samuel. Wilda said that she still wanted to find her uncle's hands, maybe with the help of like some police dogs or something, and she said that when she talked to Howard at this time, he was, quote, depressed. He feels Washington Cumberland County and Bradley County are looking at the wrong person, that they ought to look at his mother. He now claims to be innocent of all 3 murders. I don't know about y'all, but when I'm reading true crime cases, when someone changes their story like over and over, I don't know, like to me, that's like a first red flag for me. I don't know about you, but definitely for me. But despite turning over the tapes, all right, and helping the investigators whenever she could, Howard continued talking to Wilda, even as he was behind bars in New York. She said, quote, "His words are that I'm the only one who can help him and can get the charges dismissed, and he still claims he loves me." Wilda had even traveled to New York to see Howard, claiming that, she was trying to find evidence that he was innocent. Quote, "If I could prove him innocent, I would. I haven't been able to." And apparently in a conversation on January 1st, 2003, Howard told Wilda that Emma had told him that Samuel's head and hands were buried like near the park, the Winged Deer Park. And then in early March, Howard again told Wilda where Samuel's body parts could be found. And I don't know if this conversation in March is what inspired Wilda to like go back out there and search. So I was a little confused on the chain of events that happened. If Howard had been telling Wilda like all these different locations for several months, and then they finally just like hit pay dirt in March. I don't know. Now, Crumley and the other investigators, of course, did not believe Howard's story at all. They didn't think that his mother had anything to do with it, really. Now, in June of 2003, Corker tried to get Emma's bond lowered. Yeah, she's been sitting in jail since October of 2002. We're now in June of 2003. So Corker was trying to get her bond lowered, arguing that she should have it lowered to meet her financial situation. As it stood, she wasn't able to, afford the bond that had been set for her. And so he was arguing, like, hey, you should lower it to something that's like reasonable for her to get. But this drew objection from Pratt, who, remember, was representing Marie, and Crumley. Pratt again argued that, Emma was a threat to Marie, who was scared of her, and Crumley arguing that she was a flight risk. Quote, "We think she's a flight risk. We think she's a danger to the community. She's been found with passport applications. There has been talk of her going to a non-extradition country. There are people in the community that think she is a risk, if she gets out, to kill additional people. She has a new birth certificate and a new social security number." So I thought that was weird that Crumley was saying can kill additional people, because he was also saying that he believed Howard's story of not believing that his mother murdered Adam and Samantha. But I know Crumley also believed that she had a hand in dismembering them, so that could be why he really didn't want to let her out of jail. Now, apparently this fact that Emma was found with a new social security number and new birth certificate was, news to Corker. He didn't know that. Crumley and prosecutors said that they had received a passport application from Wilda, who had gotten it from Marie. And I think this passport application was for Emma. They said they found another passport application in Emma's bedroom, in a pocketbook in her bedroom. And this is when they had searched her house. And in July, Judge Brown ultimately denied Emma's request for a lowered bond. And I think it was primarily the social security number and birth certificate that prevented him from letting her go. Meanwhile, let's get back to Howard. After several delays, Howard was finally brought back from New York to Tennessee in July of 2003. Yeah. He had been in New York since the end of October 2002. His sentencing hearing for the federal drug charges was delayed numerous times. Once because Howard wanted a new attorney. Another time it was delayed because his new attorney, John Jacobs, needed time to catch up. Another time was that Howard had objected to the proposed 20-year sentence. Prosecutors wanted to give him an additional 25-year sentence for his, quote, additional criminal conduct while he had been out on bond. So that had caused a bunch of delays as Howard bitched and moaned about that. And then it was delayed another time because the prosecutor, Marshall Miller, who Crumley had actually been in constant contact with, just up and decided to quit the case one day. Yeah, out of nowhere. And this was without any sort of phone call or heads up to Crumley. And now when this happened, this really pissed Crumley off. His patience was wearing thin with New York. And, he's playing nice up until then. But when it looked like Howard's, sentencing was going to be delayed again because of this, he said, quote, "They dropped the ball. They let him out. He killed people while he was on bond. And he shouldn't have even been on bond. My understanding of federal law is once you have pled guilty, you are not bondable for an offense of that nature. So I think it's fair to say that the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York has a situation that they need to explain at some point in time. Frankly, I'm rather angry at the very idea that a person that I've been dealing with for the last couple of months would just quit his job and not even give me the courtesy of a call to let me know. I talked to him only about a week ago, and he was gung-ho and ready to go. It almost makes you wonder if he quit his job just to keep from having to try this case. Yeah, this really incensed Crumley, dude. But finally, on July 7th, 2003, after 9 months, Howard was finally sentenced in New York, and this was despite Howard trying to delay his sentencing again. He was trying to withdraw his guilty plea from 2001, y'all. And dudes, we will get into it. Howard is a masterclass in delaying justice. Like, we will get into it. So U.S. District Court Judge Sterling Johnson Jr. wouldn't let Howard withdraw his guilty plea, though. And in the end, Howard was sentenced to only 8 years. Crumley said of the sentence, quote, "The idea that he got 1 year per 100 kilos is a bit amazing. That was several $1 million. And to get 8 years and 1 month was rather a disappointment. I truly believe that down here, he would have gotten life." And finally, on July 9th, Howard was brought back to Tennessee to face the murder charges for Samantha and Adam. And remember, the authorities were still working Samuel's murder at this point, and there were investigators working Deborah's disappearance. Judge Brown appointed defense attorney Jim Bowman to represent Howard. He had actually represented Howard way back when Howard had been indicted in Tennessee. Now, there was some drama in Howard's first court appearance when one of Adam's grandmothers, Annette Chavez, I guess, attempted to confront Wilda in the courtroom after it had been adjourned. Wilda's grandson, Kelly Slayton, leapt over chairs and blocked Annette before she could reach Wilda, along with a relative of Wilda's and a security officer. And Annette said Wilda was, quote, making faces at me and wanted to confront her and stuff. And it was just, there was so much drams. Judge Brown rebuked her and ordered everyone check their motions, he was very angry and upset. Now, Teresa, remember Adam's mother and actually Annette's daughter, said that the reason emotions were running so high from them was Wilda's seemingly flip-flopping of Howard's guilt or innocence. We've talked a little bit about it before. Teresa said, quote, "She doesn't think he done it. Then she supposedly got a tape saying that he did." Now, when Wilda was asked about this incident, she said that she wished this whole case would just go away. Quote, "This is more than I want to deal with ever." Now, ultimately, prosecutors decided to go after Howard with the death penalty and said that they would prove that he killed not only Samantha and Adam, but Samuel as well. In order to qualify for the death penalty, the prosecution had to prove that the defendant killed at least 3 people, and the prosecution was going with the theory that Samantha and Adam had been killed because they knew something about Samuel's murder. Howard pled not guilty, and now that he was facing the death penalty, he was appointed another attorney, Stacy Street. And in December of 2003, Judge Brown issued a gag order in Howard's case so no one involved could speak to the media. Meanwhile, that same month, on July 8th, Marie pled guilty, and she pled guilty to the soliciting of the tampering of evidence charge. She said, quote, "Hawk said, erase the tape. Anyway, I said after that, I did not believe he could have killed his stepfather because he was very fond of him. And that's why I said what I did. I said, I don't believe it. Erase the tape." Pratt said that he actually wanted Marie to take her case to trial, arguing that her statement was just a knee-jerk reaction, it was like a heat of the moment type of thing. And he accused Crumley and the prosecution of actually just kind of being petty and malicious for even going after Marie and following through with trying to take her to trial and stuff. He was pretty much trying to argue that they have bigger fish to fry, they have, Howard and Emma to deal with, and that it was just sort of petty and mean for them to go after Marie. And that's why he wanted her to take it to trial. But he said it was Marie who wanted to plead out. Quote, "But she's tired and she's sick and she's scared and she wants to get it over." In the end, Judge Brown sentenced Marie to 2 months in jail plus 2 years probation, and this was on September 2nd. Pratt tried to get Marie released earlier, citing health problems as such, and she was furloughed from jail on October 16th and was allowed to not serve the rest of her sentence behind bars. Now, Teresa, Adam's mother, along with her sister, Adam's aunt, Kim Slayton, wanted Howard to receive the death penalty. Teresa said, quote, "No other mother should have to be afraid of anything like him being out on the streets." She said if Howard was more honest and forthright about what happened and, not changing his story and blaming everyone else under the sun, she could deal with a life behind bars sentence. But the fact that Howard, was changing his story, wasn't being forthright, just made her want to see him die. Meanwhile, let's get back to Emma and her legal troubles. So her legal proceedings were far from over. So Corker filed motions to have her have a separate trial for each of the charges against her. He also tried getting evidence that was collected at her home thrown out, and citing that he was unable to be unbiased in her trial due to the evidence that had been revealed in Marie's proceedings. Judge Brown actually recused himself and handed Emma's case over to a new judge. It was criminal court judge Bob Cupp. Now, Judge Cupp ruled that most of the evidence found at Emma's home could be used, and he refused to lower her bond. And y'all, okay, remember I said Emma gets snippy with the judge, and this includes Judge Cupp, not just Judge Brown. So I guess the reason Judge Cupp refused to even hear arguments to lower Emma's bond was because he had overheard her smarten off to her lawyer. I guess she had told Corker, quote, "I want this whole case dismissed today." And, the judge overheard that. And he said, quote, "Did you say, I want this whole case dismissed today? How are you going to get this case dismissed? Only I can do that. Or the state can decide not to prosecute." And I guess he was also pissed off because, she was just an asshole throughout the whole court proceedings, interrupting and stuff. And, interrupting and being so much of a jerk that he actually threatened to, gag her. And yeah, it was because she was acting like such a prick that he was like, you know what? I'm not even going to hear arguments to lower your bond. Which I was just like, oh my God, what are you, dude, what are you doing? Don't piss off the judge. There are certain people you just don't piss off, right? People who mess with your food and judges in your criminal case, right? And I guess when he said that, kind of went off on her or whatever, I guess she just kind of acted like a child and threw her pin on the table and was just she's bro, she's in her 70s. What did I say? She was 71 or something? And she's acting like this. Bro, come on. Now, after Emma's trial was delayed, Judge Cupp did lower her bond to $7,500. So it was looking like Emma wouldn't even stand trial until after her son. And Assistant District Attorney General Steve Finney had said that, he realized at the last minute that he couldn't, prosecute her until they wrapped up Howard's case first. Specifically, he said that he couldn't prosecute her on the accessory after the fact charge until Howard's trial was done, and we'll get into it. It's a long road for Howard to go to trial. And so when Finney said that, Judge Cupp, thought well, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to make her sit in jail all this time, especially because the max sentence that she was facing was 4 years. And on December 5th, 2003, after over a year behind bars, Emma posted bond. But it wasn't long until she was in the papers yet again. So in the next month, in January of 2004, Emma accused the police of ransacking and destroying her home. And this was when they had searched it in October, which was weird because I thought her house was being foreclosed on, but I don't know if she got it saved or what. So she invited the press to do a tour of her home and just look at the mess that the police left. She said she had to spend $500 getting new piping because the police had stolen her previous piping, along with breaking doors and windows. Quote, "I have a quarrel with the sheriff's department and with the district attorney." She said they damaged a chest and some chairs, cut out portions of her wall looking for drugs, created a mess in one of the bedrooms, stole sheets, caused dents in her garage door, broke open lock boxes that had belonged to her parents, destroyed a box of pictures, a leather jacket, a Citizens Band radio, and tore apart her son's computer. Now, Finney denied all of her accusations, and I thought this was pretty funny when he kind of smarted off a little bit. He said, quote, "That house was ransacked before anyone from the state ever entered it. It had windows knocked out, it had graffiti, there was a sheet of plywood up over the door. I let her statements go 3 times, but I'm not going to sit there and let her disparage hardworking people that are doing their jobs. And they did not abuse her dump." I thought that last part was so funny. It's just no one came in and abused your dump. Then, in the next month, February, Emma tried suing Marie, seeking to recover items that she alleged Marie had stolen from her home, along with her husband and son, as she was locked up behind bars. The alleged items included a rocking chair, Bibles, jewelry, linens, clothing, electronics, her son's baby clothes, and tools. She contended that their mother's will stipulated that the house and all of its items were to go go to her. And Marie filed motions in court saying that her sister's suit was without merit and Emma had presented no evidence to back up her claims, not even making a police report about these alleged stolen items. She also said, quote, "No will has been filed with the court and no inventory was turned in to show what was left to my sister by my mother." Marie found an attorney, Gene Scott, to represent her, and he filed motions to have a jury trial, which sent the lawsuit to a higher court. And when that happened, Emma dropped her lawsuit. She tried suing Marie again in September, this time adding Marie's husband, Howard, and Marie's daughter, Lisa Clevin, and Lisa's husband, Michael, to the lawsuit as well. Emma was also now accusing Marie of having an unknown 18-year-old woman make 2 false phone calls, one to a fire marshal, alleging that Emma intended to set fire to her sister's home, and another to an insurance adjuster, saying Emma had paid her, the 18-year-old woman, $5,000 to vandalize her house. And Emma said that this was false. She didn't have $5,000, and she was locked up at that time. So I'm not sure where Emma is coming up with this stuff. But again, Scott filed motions to have the lawsuit taken to a higher court because of a jury trial. And I think Emma ended up dropping the suit. So she was trying to bring the suit in Sessions Court, which doesn't do jury trials. And so whenever Scott filed motions to have a jury trial, it was moved out of Sessions Court. And yeah, when that happened, Emma dropped the lawsuit. I think she did the same thing the second time. Now, in February of 2004, Howard wrote a letter to Crumley saying that he needed to take action against his office and the officers with Washington and Bradley counties. Howard told Crumley that these officers with these organizations had conspired to commit criminal acts. Howard said in this letter that Crumley needed to bring all of this to Judge Brown's attention, that evidence collected by officers acting unlawfully shouldn't be used, and that both his mother and his aunt should be exonerated. Quote, "I feel that this letter should not anger you, but should be an opportunity to show that your words on the Constitution carry real meaning and are not just election hogwash." Apparently Crumley had, made some campaign speech about the Constitution and stuff, and that's what Howard was referencing. Howard also wanted to reopen his New York case, saying that evidence gained by officers in Tennessee as they were working the murders had been used against him in U.S. District Court in Brooklyn. And Crumley, of course, and his office were barred from commenting on this letter publicly. I think Crumley just ignored Howard's letter. Dude, can you believe Howard and his mother? Dude, the antics, there's more antics to come. So both Emma and Howard filed motions to have their cases dismissed. And also filed motion for the prosecutors, Crumley and Finney, to drop out of the case. Okay, yeah, they'll go ahead and do that. And, dude, get this. In April of 2004, Emma, bypassing Corker completely, filed her own subpoenas. She actually tried to compel, with subpoenas she filed herself, Crumley, Finney, Investigator Hull, other detectives involved with the case, Howard, and his attorney Bowman, to all testify at her trial. What the I couldn't believe when I was reading this. She had bypassed Corker because he had refused to file any of them. Duh, because he's the lawyer, he's the expert. Now this, alright, when Emma did this infuriated Judge Cupp, alright, and he went off, dude. He chided her, dude, he used so much sarcasm and shit when he was talking to her. It was really funny to read the dialogue happening between this judge and Emma. So I guess in a very sarcastic tone, he chided her, quote, "I can't believe how intelligent you are. How much you know about the law, Miss Hawk. You're really super." Dude, this whole court case is bonkers. She had even written in her motions to Judge Cupp that he would, quote, "do something for her and do it now." Making demands of the judge. He rebuked her, saying that he gave the orders, not her, and he was especially stunned that she would try to summon her son, who was gonna be on trial for first-degree murder, eligible for the death penalty. And she said, well, he had information that I need for my case. So Judge Cupp said, quote, "So you're going to put him on the witness stand when he's facing a first-degree murder trial with the potential of getting the death penalty? Ma'am, you're going to get your son in the electric chair with your shenanigans." And she just said, quote, "No, sir, my son is not a murderer." Judge Cupp also reamed her for, I guess, ranting at some, some clerk in his office or something. She was running her mouth off about Corker and how much she didn't like like him, how he hadn't done anything for her, and how he was making like all this money off the state, which was not true. She said Corker, quote, had made thousands of dollars off the state of Tennessee and had not done one thing for me. And Judge Cupp ripped into her for this, quote, I'm not so far removed from the practice of law that you're a lawyer's nightmare. You're an absolute nightmare to any lawyer, whether they're good or bad or indifferent, that would have to be asked to represent somebody like you because you know so much. Judge Cupp actually said he was close to taking Corker off her case and forcing her to represent herself. He also made her sit with the inmates in the courtroom one time when she had to come for like a court appearance. And like she was sitting there for a while and then suddenly she like got up, slammed the book that she had been reading, and just said, quote, I'm not going to do any more in your court. And Judge Cupp let her go home after conferring with Corker, her, and Finney in his chambers. And the apple certainly doesn't fall far from this tree, because in April 30th, 2004, other reports said March, Howard tried filing a $4 million federal lawsuit in U.S. District Court in New York, claiming that his civil rights had been violated. He wanted $2 million in punitive damages and $2 million in compensatory damages. He claimed that the affidavit used to secure the search warrants had intentionally false information, that he was not allowed an attorney as he was en route from Tennessee to New York, which he said was a conspiracy between the Washington County and Bradley County authorities. And he also claimed he was subjected to mental and physical abuse. Quote, I still, at 17 months after the fact, still suffer abuse and have not received any medical treatment yet. His lawsuit was ultimately dismissed in June by U.S. District Judge Thomas Hull, saying that Howard's claims was filed like more than a year past a statutory limit and that his lawsuit had failed to state a claim. Hull also wrote that Howard's claims of abuse lacked any allegations of fact to support them. He also ordered Howard to pay the $150 court filing fee that you have to pay to file the lawsuit, which I just thought was kind of silly. So it was ultimately ruled that those statements Howard made to authorities accusing his mom of murdering Adam and Samantha could not be used at his trial, but the conversations he had with Wilda could be used. His attorneys also tried to get like 3 separate trials going, one for like each victim or whatever, but the courts ruled there was just too much information. This case was just too complex. There was just no way to really like separate out this case into 3 trials. I guess most of all though, it was that damning recorded conversation that Wilda had recorded where Howard confessed to her. There was just, because he was like admitting to both Adam and Samantha's murders and that, there was no way to sort of like separate that and all that. And yeah, pretty much the courts were just like, you know what, it's too convoluted, too much of a mess. You're having one trial. Judge Brown did allow for a separate trial for the 3rd abuse of a corpse charge, and this was for Samuel's body. At this point, Howard had not yet been formally indicted for his stepfather's murder in Bradley County, and I think because of that, Judge Brown ruled ultimately that at Howard's trial, the jury could only be instructed to determine if Howard had killed Adam and Samantha, not Samuel. They couldn't factor that into their decision making. Judge Brown ruled that if the prosecution wanted to go after Howard for like the disposal of the bodies, so like the abuse of the corpse charges, they'd have to do that in a separate trial. Then, 5 weeks before he was to stand trial in April of 2005, Howard attempted to fire Bowman and Street, but Judge Brown wouldn't let him, citing that Howard didn't have any real valid reasons. But Street and Bowman ended up filing their own motions to be dismissed from the case. They said that Howard was just flat out refusing to cooperate with them. Yeah, because he's a child. In the end, Judge Brown reluctantly granted their request, and he chastised Howard, accusing him of trying to delay his trial, calling him, quote, pig-headed. After going through 5 more attorneys, guys, 5 more attorneys, Howard was finally appointed defense attorneys T. Wood Smith and Gene Scott. I was unclear if this was the same Gene Scott who represented Marie. I was a little confused on that. And through shenanigans, Howard was able to keep delaying his case, guys, which in turn, remember, kept delaying his mother's. All in all, Howard went through 9 attorneys before he stood trial. 9 attorneys. Dudes, honestly, like reading the articles of Howard like kicking up dust and delaying his trial was so infuriating because it was every time when we were getting close to his trial, every time he came up with some BS excuse. I don't like my lawyer. I want a new lawyer. Blah, 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 blah. Like it was infuriating. infuriating reading about this. Like, I remember I kept flipping through articles like, when is this a-hole gonna stand trial? So Howard, like I said, kept delaying his trial, which in turn delayed his mother's trial. And by August of 2005, when she still had not gone to trial, Emma was getting fed up and pissed off. And honestly, I don't know if I blame her. So remember, it had continuously been ruled that she could not stand trial until after Howard. And she had tried to fight this. But no matter what she did, she could not get, like, her trial moved up. Even the Tennessee State Supreme Court ruled against her. That's how high she brought her case. She tried to fire Corker, and, she and Judge Cupp went at it numerous times. And this was because Emma kept filing her own motions in court, guys. She kept, bypassing her lawyer and filing motions. Finally, in January of 2006, Judge Cupp took Corker off Emma's case because she had once again filed her own motions defying Judge Cupp's order. I think it was in this motion she was requesting that Howard be released from jail because she had been diagnosed, I don't know, with some sort of cancer, and Howard had the same blood type as her or something. And Judge Cupp had at that point, and he said, quote, "Since you're so smart and know what the law is, I'm going to relieve Mr. Corker. I've put up with you as long as I'm going to. You've abused the system. The state has paid for investigators and lawyers for you. You're getting ready to bury yourself. You need to understand that anything you say, they're going to use against you. You're just like your son. He had some of the best lawyers in the state, and they've been flushed." Oh my god, dude, Cupp had it with this broad. And going back to Howard, he had finally run out of the excuse of going through attorneys to delay his trial, so he resorted to denying medical treatment as a way to delay it even further. In May of 2006, he developed some sort of foot ailment, and since he refused medical treatment for it, it developed into gangrene. And Judge Brown said, quote, "The concern the court has is now that he's running out of lawyers, he's going to try using his health to manipulate the trial." And Howard had actually successfully delayed his trial so long that Crumley ended up moving districts in August of 2006, before Howard would have his day in court. In October of that same year, after refusing to cooperate with medical or prison authorities, Howard was forcibly moved to Middle Tennessee Mental Health Facility, and this was located in Nashville so he could be mentally evaluated. In the end, it was deemed he was mentally competent to stand trial. In April of 2007, Emma was ordered to spend 24 hours in jail, and this was after she had failed to inform her bond company of her new address. She had moved without telling them, and they had in turn requested to be released from her bond. Emma said that she told the owner of the bond place that she was moving, and she asked Judge Cupp not to call her to court again until it was time for her trial. Quote, "Howard hasn't been to court yet, and it's been almost 5 years. I'm out of this area now. I have a new life." Cupp told her that she wasn't, quote, "going anywhere," and allowed the bond company to be released from Emma's bond and sentenced her to 48 hours behind bars. But he revised this order when a man named Russell Dorman, who described Emma as his common-law wife, said that he was making sure that she was doing everything that she had to as far as, courts and, paperwork and appearances were concerned, but that he had recently had leg surgery and he was actually dependent on her to drive him to his doctor appointments. So Cupp ended up releasing Emma into Russell's custody, but ordered her to come back and serve 24 hours behind bars for, quote, "putting the court through this." Now, in February of 2008, both Smith and Scott won it off of Howard's case. And at this point, not only was Judge Brown fed up with all of this, but so was the public. There were so many, angry letters and editorials just going on about how, it was so obvious what Howard was doing. It was so obvious he was manipulating the justice system and doing everything he could to delay going to trial. And finally, Judge Brown had had enough, and in April of 2008, he ordered Howard to represent himself. Quote, "The conclusion of the court is you have grievously manipulated the constitutional right to counsel, resulting in delays, disruptions, and it's preventing the orderly administration of justice. You've gotten the case again when it's getting close to trial, and again, you fire your lawyers. Therefore, your right to counsel is forfeited. You no longer have a right to lawyers in this case. From this day on, you're representing yourself. You're on your own, which is going to be pitiful from what I've seen here today. What a damned fool job he is doing trying to represent himself." Oh my god, I was laughing so hard when I read this because I was going on newspapers.com and reading all the news articles, and I couldn't believe how many there were. And I couldn't believe, I was like, okay, is this fool ever going to come to trial? This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. We're in 2008, people. All right? He had been indicted in 2002 for Adam and Samantha's murders. Judge Brown also denied Howard's request to be moved to a different prison that had a larger law library, and Judge Brown said that Howard didn't have a right to a law library. Jim Bowman was then appointed as Howard's elbow counsel, and Howard then had the audacity to bitch that Brown wasn't letting him hire like these 2 attorneys that he wanted to hire. Mofo, you've gone through like 9 attorneys. Get the hell out of here. You want more? How about you pay for it? By the way, guys, remember, this is all on the taxpayer's dime. All of these attorneys for Howard are court appointed. Judge Brown really went off on Howard when he said that the judge had forced him to represent himself. Judge Brown said, quote, "You are possessed with a degree of acidity that I've never encountered. I intend to give you a fair trial, as difficult as you're making that, and that's the way it is. Don't think you're going to sue me to get me off the case, because I'm not going to read it. I'll send it down to the Attorney General." Howard appealed Brown's ruling that he would be forced to represent himself, and he appealed to an appellate court, and in July of 2008, they appointed Gerald Gully, an attorney out of Knoxville, to represent Howard in his appeal. In June of 2008, Emma was ordered back to jail when she failed to show up for a court hearing. She phoned in from Texas and informed Judge Cupp that she did have an attorney, but I guess at that point it didn't matter. And I'm not sure what happened to that, because the next information that I could find about Emma was when she died. She died in October of 2009 at 78 years old in Oklahoma City, with her case never going to trial, guys. She was arrested in 2002. She passed away in 2009, and in that 7 years, she never went to trial. Can you believe that? In July of 2009, the Criminal Court of Appeals ruled that Howard did indeed have to represent himself at trial. In November of that same year, the Tennessee Supreme Court refused to hear Howard's case. He was appealing, of course, the appellate court's decision, and they refused to even hear his case. And in March of 2010, Judge Brown was forced to recuse himself from Howard's case, and this is because Howard had filed a $2 million federal lawsuit against Judge Brown, claiming that he was, quote, grandstanding in the case, like with the media and stuff. Dude, Howard is a joke. So criminal court judge John Kerry Blackwood was then assigned to Howard's case. And finally, Howard's trial began later on in June of that year with jury selection. Finally, June of 2010, guys. He was indicted in October of 2002. June of 2010 is when he's going to trial. His first day of trial was Monday, June 14th, 2010, and he was prosecuted by Assistant District Attorney General Dennis Brooks and District Attorney Tony Clark. In his opening statements, Howard said that he was set up for the murders by his mother, who threatened to kill him and his family, said Adam and Samantha were teenagers, quote, out on the street. Their parents didn't care about them. What I didn't do, I didn't kill them. He pointed out that there were no forensics tying him to the murder. No DNA or blood evidence was found at his mom's home. The prosecution again asserted that Samantha and Adam were killed at Emma's home because they knew something about Samuel's murder. They also said, according to their testing, Samantha and Adam were killed approximately 3 days apart, with Adam being killed first on October 6th, shot under the throat towards the top of the skull. Then Samantha, 3 days later on the 9th, being shot in the back of the head twice, execution style, after being bound. Dr. Aaron Watson, a graduate-level assistant professor at Southeast Louisiana State University, testified that in her conservative opinion, Adam was killed sometime between October 5th and October 8th, while Samantha was possibly killed between October 7th and October 10th. And this was based on like the insects removed from the bodies. That's what she was an expert on, is like the presence of like larvae and maggots and flies and like all that kind of stuff. And she said she was confident that Adam was definitely killed before Samantha. Now, the prosecution theorized that in those 3 days that Howard kept Samantha against her will, she knew that her husband had been murdered, and they also asserted that Howard had dismembered Adam using a chainsaw. And this was based, they found, on Adam's like clothing and his skin, and they actually had found a chainsaw. I can't remember if they found it in the storage unit or at the home, but they did find a chainsaw, and I believe it was tested for like the presence of like blood in like human skin, and it tested positively. Prosecutors had also found the fabric of Adam's jacket, like fibers from it. And remember, his torso had been wrapped in a jacket when they found it in the storage container, and they had found these same fibers that matched Adam's jacket in Emma's garage. The prosecution also still went with the like sex for cocaine aspect between Howard, Adam, and Samantha, which just kind of confused me. I never read anything about the autopsy, like, revealing drugs in their system or anything. I feel like that's something that would have been reported, since there was a lot of information reported about this case. So I don't know why they hammered so hard on that point, not sure. Wilda also testified. By that time, she was going by Wilda Gadd, and throughout her testimony, Howard continuously referred to her as Mrs. Willis, and she had to correct him numerous times. She said, quote, "My name is not Mrs. Willis, it's Gadd." And at one point, she told him, quote, "You're just giving me a headache." She testified that Howard had told her numerous things and multiple stories about who had killed Samantha and Adam. Quote, "He told me that he had cut Adam's hands and head off and threw them in the river. He was talking like it didn't matter to him. They were dead and gone." Then she testified that he had told her, quote, "He told me his mother killed them. He told me Daniel Foster killed them." Remember, Samantha's brother. "He told me the mafia killed them." A neighbor who lived next to Emma, Wilma Clay, also testified at this trial. Oh my god, dude, like, I thought this part was funny. This is why I'm including it. And when Howard asked her if she had gotten along with his mother, she responded, quote, "No, nobody did. She was low-life evil, just like you." I thought that was so funny. And Judge Blackwood actually had to tell the jury to, like, hey, you have to disregard that last part of her statement. But I just thought that was so funny. All the evidence we've discussed thus far was brought at trial, minus the conversation Howard had had with investigators where he accused his mother of killing Adam and Samantha. And for a trial that took so long to come to be, it only lasted about 4 days. The jury began deliberations on June 19th, and by Monday, June 21st, 2010, the jury found Howard guilty. And 2 hours later, during the sentencing hearing, I guess the gruesome autopsy photos were shown to the jury, and one juror actually, like, got physically ill. Like, they had to physically remove themselves from the courtroom, and Blackwood had to actually, like, recess the court as the juror got themselves together. Howard ultimately received the death penalty, and he was sent to death row at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution, located in Nashville. He tried to appeal for a new trial, but that was denied in June of 2012. He tried to appeal again in October of 2015, saying Wilda's phone conversations shouldn't have been admissible at trial because she was acting as, like, a state agent. But that too was denied in July of 2016 by the Tennessee Supreme Court. He attempted to appeal again in May of 2017, but that too was denied. And as of 2022, I read that there was a stay of executions in the state of Tennessee. They were putting lethal injections on hold as I think, like, they examined, like, you know, like, if it was humane to use and all that. And that is all the updated information that I could find on Howard. I think he tried getting a new trial in 2019, but that too was ultimately denied. And to this day, no one has been charged in the murder of Samuel, and nothing has ever been found of Deborah. And whoo boy, guys, that was the wild tale of Howard Hawk Willis. Thank you again for Bright Mama 85 for sending this case my way. And I wanted to read a little bit about your comment because you have a little bit of a personal connection to this case. So you wrote, "I have a case suggestion, Howard Hawk Willis. He murdered a young married couple, Adam Crismer and Samantha Lemming, and dismembered their bodies in 2002 in Johnson City, Tennessee. A skull and hands was found in Boone Lake, and the rest of the remains were found in a storage unit, which was located beside and behind my apartment when I was attending ETSU. My ex and I met him several times as he would come to the unit a lot and just hang out in the area until this smell started. I don't remember seeing him much after that. It's very sad, but the smell was horrendous. We lived on what people call tree streets, and it became unbearable in our apartment building, which was an old house converted into a few units. We were home when they made the discovery, and of course, spoke with police. I was barely 18 years old at the time. My poor mama came in on 2 wheels and was knocking the police out of the way to get to my ex, my roommate, and I. The police were very nice and knew we were just traumatized kids. I have never forgotten about Adam and Samantha. I think they were from Georgia, but I don't want to say too much about the actual case itself." Wow, that is wild. That is super wild that you lived, like, near the storage units, were there as they were making the discoveries. That's wild. Super wild. And you said Howard would come hang out at, like, the unit a lot. Like, did you ever see Adam and Samantha? Did you ever see him hanging out with kids? That's what creeped me out with this case, is that apparently Howard, he's like this old fart in his, like, 50s, hanging out with teenagers, and that was, like, what he was known for, from what I could gather. It's just super, super creepy. I have lots of thoughts. I have lots of questions about this case. So, first of all, do you guys think Howard did it? Is he a murderer? Did Emma help? Do you think Emma helped her son with these murders? Do you think she knew? Do you think her and Marie knew? What do you guys think? I'm so curious what you guys think. Like, if Emma didn't help her son, I think she certainly wasn't going to turn him in or something. I don't know. Maybe she was just unlucky and Howard just used her house to murder them. I don't know, man. I don't know, because she was in the hospital. That was why she was at her sister's home. So I don't know. Maybe it was just an opportune moment for Howard to use his mother's home. I personally think, yes, Howard is a murderer, serial killer. I think he did murder Deborah. We'll probably never find her body. I'm guessing he probably dismembered her. And the fact that Howard was a truck driver for many years just makes me wonder, is there more victims out there? And I don't know, man, old fart who is into drugs, like hardcore drugs, hanging out with teenagers. Is there some sexual assault in there as well? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's some like disturbing things that go through my mind. Why do you guys think Samantha, Adam, and Samuel were killed? That's what I can't gather. Like, why were they killed? Is the prosecution right? Did Adam and Samantha know something about Samuel's murder? But then that begs the question, why was Samuel murdered? I don't know. I have so many questions, guys. So many questions. And I said this, earlier, I never read anything about drugs being found in Adam or Samantha's bodies. They usually report that kind of stuff, right? And I never found anything about that. And, Adam and Samantha's families say that they did not do hardcore drugs. So I don't know why they went for the sex for cocaine aspect. I don't know where that came from, why they thought that. I don't know. Maybe they were into drugs and they just didn't report drugs in their system. I don't know, man. I have so many questions. And why do you guys think Howard talked to Wilda? The dude's not that bright, even though he seems to think he's clever. Did he, think he was setting up his defense in Adam and Samantha's murder by saying oh, well, they killed my father-in-law, so I killed them? I don't know, man. I'm so curious to know what you guys think of this case. Bright Mama 85, if you're watching, please let me know. How often did you see him hanging there? Did he often have young kids around? Did you ever see Adam and Samantha around? Please let us know if you are watching. And boy, I think that will do it for this week for Crime Dive. And sorry my little planet guy. Here he died. The battery must have died. It must not have charged enough. Oh, well. Well, I will let you all go. Have a great, wonderful week. Be happy, healthy out there. Remember, just don't be a dick. Don't spread misery wherever you go. Just spread goodness and kindness, okay? It's desperately needed right now. Alrighty, y'all. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.